France has adopted a controversial law against separatism. It contains a raft of measures to maintain secularism in public services, battling hate speech online, and the protection of teachers and public servants. The law, though, also clamps down on organizations of a religious nature, as well as how these organizations are financed. But it's been slammed as being anti-Muslim by politicians on the left, while those on the right say it doesn't go far enough. Well, joining us today is Ahmet Kuru, who's Professor of Political Science at San Diego State University. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Tell us a bit more about the text of this law and what it's trying to do here in France.
Thanks for having me. The so-called separatism law, soon become the French law, has created a global debate in the United States. I also contribute with an article. So when we look at the content of the law, we see that there is an expansion of state powers and certain restrictions over religious freedoms. For example, the laws authorize the government to dissolve any religious institution without a court order. The law also puts very strict state control over homeschooling, as well as requiring that anyone providing public service, for example, a bus driver, cannot carry a religious symbol such as a Muslim headscarf. Therefore, even if you defend the law as a necessary requirement, given that France has faced terrorism by Muslims and others in the last 5 years, it is still the fact that the content of the law is intended and designed to empower the government at the expense of certain religious liberties.
Do you think that this law targets in particular the Muslims and Islam as a religion as opposed to other religions?
Unfortunately, yes, because although the language of the bill is very neutral, it doesn't refer to Islam or political Islam. The political context and its process is very much focusing on Islam because the debate became publicly globally known by French President Macron's speech on Islam. And there are many claims that Macron is trying to appeal right-wing voters who could vote for Marine Le Pen's right-wing party. So therefore, as a political scientist, I'm concerned on two major issues in political context. One is that the discourse by President Macron and others focusing on Islam, singling out Islam as source of problems, really ignore the socio-economic basis of the problems of Muslim youth in France, such as unemployment, discrimination, and alienation. And my second concern is that Macron's claim to create an enlightened new Islam contradict the very much French and universal principle of secularism or laicite of separation of religion and state. It violates this principle.
But do you think that there is a problem in France with this religion in particular? Because there have been many attacks, and these attacks have been from radicalized individuals who claim to be practicants of a certain religion, Islam. I mean, we're not seeing Catholic extremists or Buddhist extremists in France waging these sorts of attacks. So does the government have a point?
Yes and no. The government has a point because of the escalation of the last 5 years, terrorism perpetrated by Muslims, unfortunately. But if we look at the global context, violence has been associated by many religious actors, even Buddhists in Myanmar and elsewhere today in the world. And historically, all religions have been interpreted to violent interpretation and acts, including Catholicism. But when we compare United States and France, as I did in my book, both have faced Islamic radicalism since 9/11. No need to repeat 9/11, what happened in the United States with terrorism. But in the US, especially after the Black Lives Matter event, we focus on racism and recognition of multiple identities. Whereas we see a divergence now between United States and France, two major secular Western democracies. Despite we focus on racism and multiple identities in the US, in France, what we recognize is that there is too much emphasis on a minority, Muslims, and ignoring the fact that this biggest minority in France, mostly composed by non-white Muslims, mostly coming from former French colonies and their descendants. So, yes, there should be precautions against terrorism by Muslims, but there should be precautions against discrimination, racism, and colonization and its legacy.
Okay, Ahmet Kuru, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for your time here on France 24.
Thanks for having me.